A common belief in the art community is that you need to have fancy supplies to be a great artist. And while sometimes I personally prefer the fancy stuff, I don't think that's true. Beliefs like these can really hold potential artists back. So let me explain to you today on why prices don't make you a better or worse artist. Hey, it's Bree, and I usually do art commentary and just art in general, so if that's what you like, why not stick around? Also, quick thing before we start, we reached 50,000 subscribers. Holy moly, thank you so much. Like, genuinely, I am so happy right now. But yeah, I just wanted to give a small thanks, but I know you guys are more interested in the video, so to the video. So I had gotten a comment a while back asking me to talk about how you don't need expensive art supplies to be an artist, and I couldn't agree more. This idea was sitting in my notes app for a while, but I finally decided to make this a video. I didn't start getting the expensive stuff until I was around 13 to 14, and before then I used things like Crayola supplies, dollar store supplies, and those art kits you get every birthday or Christmas. And I still rarely buy expensive supplies. I mainly use cheap supplies and get gifted expensive stuff on rare occasions. And let me tell you, the amount of great pens I found at the dollar store is unreal. Like, you know when you use a pen and it's just so perfectly inky that you just love it? Yeah, that. But I've noticed that so many people think that to be a good artist, or just an artist in general, you need expensive supplies. Well, you're wrong. You can be a great artist and work with literally anything. And that's what the point of today's video is. This video isn't meant to hate on expensive supplies or say you can't want expensive supplies, but to let you guys know that the price of your supplies doesn't define your worth as an artist, nor does it make your art suddenly bad. And I should let you guys know it's perfectly fine to buy, have, or want both expensive or cheap art supplies. Neither is bad to own or have, and both are perfectly fine. But what, don't believe me and want proof that cheap supplies doesn't mean you can't be good at art or just an artist in general? On one of my shorts, I made a drawing video that I'll put on screen that I made with a pack of Crayola colored pencils. And where I get them, they're pretty cheap, but that's crazy, right? I'm honestly still proud of this piece despite it not being my current art style. And some of you might be wondering, what do you mean these aren't Prismacolors, or these expensive brands that I keep seeing? But I think people tend to forget that expensive supplies don't make the art better entirely. Maybe the quality of how the colors look or just how the texture is, like maybe it looks smoother and just more pigmented, but not the art itself. And I also do understand that some cheap supplies are just harder to use, like those cheap erasers on the dollar store pencils that don't work and just turn the page black that I have a personal grudge against because I never saw it coming and they always ruin my favorite pieces, or those markers that dry out in seconds. And you know, sometimes cheap supplies, they don't blend as well, or maybe the colors aren't as pigmented, or maybe they aren't accurate to the color it's labeled as, or they don't last long. Those struggles of cheaper supplies are real, and I won't pretend they don't exist in a lot of cheaper supplies just for the sake of making people feel better. I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys and not sugarcoat it to push the point of the video. A lot of cheap supplies can suck. A lot. But not all cheap art supplies is bad. Sure, some of the art supplies can be lower quality, but sometimes they're good and they actually might surprise you. And with some of the cheap art supplies that I've used, I'd argue that they're just as good or better than the expensive supplies. But those are just from my personal experience. But how the art turns out is mostly because of the artist, not the supplies. Why, you may ask? Well, for one, usually it takes time to adapt to all new mediums and art supplies. I remember getting Prismacolors for the first time, thinking it had the holy power to allow me to create those hyper-realistic drawings like the other artists. And I actually ended up preferring my cheaper ones when I first used them, believe it or not. And it's not the fault of the Prismacolors, no, they're great. If you're planning on buying some, buy them. Don't take this as me saying, don't buy them. But I didn't like them because I wasn't used to them yet. Like, I don't know, the first time I used them, I just fell off. It was because I was so used to my cheaper ones. But once I used it a few more times, I actually enjoyed them as much as my other color pencils. It was the first time I used expensive colored pencils, so I was already so used to the texture and feel of my old ones. And this goes for all art supplies. The second you get them, you aren't going to be some Van Gogh. But like almost all things, it takes time. But of course it doesn't go for everyone. Maybe you do actually do well at your first attempt, and great job, but just know that there isn't a guaranteed success every time. And same with cheaper supplies, you can learn to adapt to using them, it just takes time. And have you seen those cheap versus expensive art supplies videos? A lot of them turn out really nice on both sides. Sure, the expensive ones can look better in a lot of them, but it doesn't make the cheap side bad. With all the ones I've seen, they both are drawn amazingly. The quality of the expensive ones just look a bit better. But you'll also notice that the art itself or the art styles in those videos don't change. Only the supply's quality. It doesn't affect the art itself most times, which is why I said that the way the art turns out is mostly from the artist. Though I do understand just wanting the feel of having fancy supplies, since it looks way cooler and just feels cooler. Me and my friend were recently talking about how we wanted the fancy stuff just because it looks cool. So I understand firsthand. And that conversation is what reminded me to make this video. But your art supplies isn't going to magically improve your art entirely if that's what you're aiming for. It will up the quality of the way that the supplies makes the art look, but expensive art supplies just enhances the skill you currently have. And yeah, there can be some really, really crappy supplies out there that feel impossible to work with. But just test it out and then get to thinking about how you can adapt to what you have. If you're stuck with some really bad art supplies, use it as an opportunity to challenge yourself. Even switch up the original plan you had in mind if you want to. Just see how you can work with the supplies you have. Just make sure to have fun and don't set some unrealistically high expectations just for practice. Just go with the flow and see where the process takes you. It might even just be one of those trust the process situations. And if you don't like the outcome, at least you had fun and did the best you could with what you had. But don't take this as me saying you shouldn't buy expensive stuff. You can and you should if you want to. But don't feel bad and think your art can't look good if you can't get it. And again, the point of this video isn't to say that expensive supplies is useless or entirely unneeded. It's just not a requirement of being an artist. There is no rule in art saying thou shalt not use cheap art supplies. There's no rules at all. And a big reason that I mentioned that it can hold artists back at the beginning of the video is because that many artists believe that they can't be an artist if they don't have expensive supplies, which is simply not true. Or some may even believe that they can't be a good artist without expensive supplies, which again, isn't true. Nobody is going to break into your house and put you 6 feet under if you dare to pick up a cheap pencil with the intent to draw. You can be an artist with cheap art supplies, expensive art supplies, hell, even no art supplies. And you're probably like, wait, what? But have you seen those pieces where people turn trash into sculptures, make sand and snow sculptures, and so many other things that are art that don't require money at all? Art isn't defined by the price you use to make it. I've said this before, but if you're new here, there are no rules or requirements of being an artist. Sure, there can be guidelines if there's a set thing you plan to achieve, but even guidelines are allowed to be unfollowed if wanted. There can be steps to achieve specific things, but you don't have to be forced to draw certain things, draw with certain things, or draw a certain way. Art is just a way to express yourself, draw what you're thinking, feeling, all of that. It's a hobby or job based entirely on emotion and creativity. Any form of art is art, so whether you have cheap or expensive supplies, it doesn't matter. But I will say more expensive supplies does help in an art profession, though just to help the quality, since as I've said before, a lot of expensive supplies does hold up better quality and last a lot longer, but it's not a necessity in art. And I also want to add, if you do have expensive art supplies or want to buy some, don't not use them or buy them because you don't think your art is good enough. Even if you don't think you're a pro or a museum-worthy artist, it's never considered a waste to use expensive art supplies. Art is art and it's not a waste, it's a practice. Honestly, practicing with higher quality supplies is good as well, so don't miss the opportunity just because you believe that you aren't ready. Plus, it's super fun to draw with and to just use this fancy stuff in general. A little off topic, but I felt like I wanted to say that, so hopefully this helps someone who wants to buy or use expensive supplies, but is scared to just for this reason. Oh, and this applies for digital art too. You don't need expensive art tablets or pens to be an artist. At one point, I literally used my computer, a free drawing app, and my touchpad, as well as my phone, IBIS Paint X, and my finger. And I was fine with both, and you can actually see those drawings that I have made with both in my earlier videos. But overall, like I said, this video wasn't made to trash on cheap or expensive supplies. Both can be good. And while cheap supplies can be difficult to use, there's ways to learn to adapt with what you got, and even create a style out of the quality of your supplies. And while cheap supplies can be difficult to use, there's ways to adapt with what you got and even create a style out of the quality of your supplies. You aren't always going to be perfect right off the bat when using new supplies as well. So you could struggle with both expensive and cheap supplies. But the more you make do with what you have, the more time you have to figure out how to deal with the struggles you're having with the certain supplies you're using. You might not even get your outcome that you had planned, but you could create something entirely new. And even if you have bad quality art supplies that you think is impossible to work with, there can be a way to turn that into something beautiful. And remember, all artistic mistakes can be turned into something amazing. You just have to look at it from a different perspective. And hey, if you sit through and deal with the art supplies that you think is impossible to work with, you're just building up your abilities as an artist. All the time I love experimenting with supplies that aren't the best. Because the challenge is always good. It can be fun and can really help you improve, mostly in the aspect of adapting to things. And it's honestly impressive and shows how well you can make do with what you've got. And hey, if you want, take this as a challenge to use supplies you absolutely despise. Your supplies are not as important as your creativity. Just keep being creative and the ideas will come to you. So buy cheap supplies, buy expensive supplies, Just make sure to have fun while creating. But I hope this video could be useful to those that are struggling with thinking that their worth as an artist is based on how much money they spend. But yeah, that's all for today. Here are the brush codes for today, and make sure to comment your thoughts and future video ideas to possibly be in a future video. And with that, I'm gonna head out. Make sure to love your art, love others, and love yourselves. Bye!